First of all, we had an extremely tight post-production schedule. The movie was green-lit based upon being in the theatres by a certain date. So our post-production schedule was less than 6 months, which on a film of this magnitude in terms of visual effects is a very dangerous thing. So we went to our first test and we had a lot of horrific, gory sequences in there. The maggots around the legs, JD being skinned alive. And what we found was the audience just couldn't, it was just too much. It undermined the drama. Now, they were also watching a film that did not have complete visual effects. Because the schedule was so tough, we couldn't test it with a complete bunch of visual effects. We then cut those sequences out of the film. We also changed the ending a number of times, and that was the film that was released.
We cut a lot of scenes from the final version of the film, partly because we had a very difficult post-production period on the movie. The post-production period was always going to be short, but as a director you have a guaranteed 10-week director's cut, which is guaranteed by the Directors Guild of America. But you can waive that if the studio put enough pressure on you, and this was one of the cases where the studio, they wanted the movie, they were desperate to release the movie, they were excited about it, they were saying all the right things to me, so I said, kind of in my naivety, that I would shorten the director's cut from 10 weeks to 6 weeks. And then what happened was, because I was also directing the second unit, we continued to shoot wire work and zero gravity work. After the main unit wrapped, I shot for another 2 weeks with the second unit. So officially, my director's cut had been going on for 2 weeks, even though I was still on the stage shooting. So when it came down to it, I really only had 4 weeks to assemble the movie before we showed it to the studio. And then they also had the idea that the first time they would see the film, we would also do an audience test screening. So 4 weeks to assemble a movie as complicated as Event, with all the visual effects, with all the kind of hell sequences that had to be very finely cut, because it's those visions of hell are lots of 2, 1, 3 frame cuts, which take forever. It was a huge amount of work to do in 4 weeks, and frankly we didn't manage to do it. So the movie was overly long, and it wasn't in great shape. Some of the scenes weren't polished very well. Those bits of bad performance, those bits of bad direction, all those things that you normally take out into 10 weeks, we didn't have time to do in 4 weeks. And added to which, we had to test in America. So we had to fly the movie over there because we were doing post in London. And we mixed the sound for the film the night before we flew to America. And the mixing studio we were in, basically broke down. So we couldn't finish the sound mix properly. So we went there with a movie that was, wasn't edited properly. The sound mix was bad. And in a horror movie, I mean, it's the classic thing, but if you turn the volume down on any scary movie, it's not scary anymore. I mean, you can sit through any scary scene, and if you don't have the music and you don't have the sound effects and you don't have the build, it just doesn't frighten you. So all of those things conspired to mean that the first test screening we had of Event was just disastrous. It didn't go well at all. And in that situation, I think the studio reaction is always, when you have a movie that doesn't really work, the first instinct is to push the filmmakers to cut the film down, make it shorter, make it faster, just get it over with, so the audience don't have to sit through. I think the first cut was just over 2 hours. It was 2 hours and 10 minutes. And they were like, you have to take half an hour out of it, it's got to be shorter, and we did that. It was really my first studio film that I'd done where we'd had a bad test. Mortal Kombat, we had good tests on, the audience really liked it. This was the first time I'd kind of walked into a room of 350 people, they watched the movie, and at the end they just didn't like it. Or some people liked it passionately, but not enough. So we cut the film, and I think again, because we're on a very tight post-production period, we had to go back to America a week later and test the movie again. And if you only have a week, it's very hard to make rational, well thought out decisions. So I think we went from one end of the spectrum where the movie was too long, undoubtedly, and then we cut it, and then I think it became too short. And then the release of the film was looming, and we ended up releasing that version of the movie. And I think that was a big mistake, because I felt there were definitely very good scenes that weren't quite reaching their potential, but could have done if we'd had more time to work on them. but because the studio were adamant on releasing the movie on a certain date, we just never had time to really fix the film. And the scenes we cut out were primarily as well related to kind of the visions of hell, the experiences that the crew of the Lewis and Clark had on the event Horizon. And there was a terrific sequence that Andrew Kevin Walker wrote, who wrote Seven, and he came in at one point to do a polish on the screenplay. And he wrote this great sequence where the crew of the Lewis and Clark have just come through the airlock in the event Horizon the first time, and they see everything floating in zero gravity. They see ice crystals, they see a wrench floating, they see a watch floating. And then Fishburne sees something, and he walks up to it. And it was framed so he didn't quite know how big it was, because whatever it was in the foreground and he was in the background. So he thought it was something quite big. But as he got closer and closer, he realized it was something quite small, until eventually he could get it in his fingers like that. And what you realized was, and Sam Neill and Jolie were looking at it on the monitors, and Jason Isaacs were looking at it, trying to see what it was, and it was a tooth that had been ripped out by the root. So you had the tooth, you had the whole root of the tooth, and you had a bit of gum attached to it as well. So it's just like someone had ripped it out with a pair of pliers. And it was a truly disturbing image. But it took a long time to play that scene out. And it was one of the scenes that kind of bit the dust, and I was always very sorry about that. You know, because did it progress the plot at all? No, it didn't. And that's the reason why it came out as well, because the pressure was make the film shorter, get on with it. And it didn't progress the plot, which was the studio's reasoning for taking it out. For me, though, it was truly disturbing, and it kind of informed their exploration of the event, and I think would have unsettled the audience even more. Although, in retrospect, you know, the audience was so unsettled anyway. You know, they were terrified when our heroes were exploring the event Horizon. But I feel that scene was one that we lost, that I always wanted to put back in again.
Paul and I personally feel we didn't have enough time to really fix it. We think if we'd completed the visual effects, the film might have been better with some of the gory stuff left in, and we wish we'd had enough time to fix the ending. We went into the movie with a script that worked up until the last third.
The other scene that was heavily trimmed was what happened to the original crew of the event Horizon. There was a whole kind of big, violent, kind of bloody orgy scene that was shot where essentially the crew were they were having sex, but they were also murdering each other while they were doing it. So they're kind of like fucking each other to death, and it was pretty bloody and unpleasant. And I was actually helped by another filmmaker friend of mine who's another director who came in to direct Second Unit a couple of times, called Vadim Jean, who's probably know from he's done a lot of kind of romantic comedies like Leon the Pig Farmer, but he clearly has a dark side to him, because when I brought him in, because you know I'd started shooting these sequences and then I kind of ran out of time. I had to go back to the main unit, so he came in and he shot a lot of the kind of violent orgiastic scenes.
There's been discussions of the visions of hell sequences. They had to be cut. Essentially, they're sequences of orgiastic, perverse sexuality, violence. It's very much like Hieronymus Bosch, or the photography of Vidkin. I mean, I'll give you an example, but a man ramming his forearm, his fist down his mouth, ripping out his innards. There was nothing sexy about this. This is extremely dark. It is hell. It is basically things that are normally pleasurable, they're being flipped, so they're absolutely horrific. That's what the ship is. That's what we're saying the ship is taking you to. It's the inverse of what is pleasurable. It is the most painful. Obviously, some people might get pleasure from that pain, but that wasn't the idea behind it. And I really think there's a much stronger cut with some of those sequences in. Because I think at the end of the day, if you understood and accepted the idea behind the film, then those sequences would not come across as gratuitous. It's very difficult in a film which deals with hell and the devil to know how to present hell and the devil, because everybody has their specific idea of what hell and the devil is. we did it in two ways. We basically showed you the hell of guilt when you torture yourself because you feel you did these things to these people and how that eats you out from the inside. And then we just gave people hard and horrific glimpses of, as I said, these orgiastic, destructive scenes. I mean, there's a great moment where Fishburne is terrified and exhausted, and he leans his head against the ship, and he goes, bang! You get this sudden vision, and he goes, fuck, this thing knows it's living, it's a sentient being. It knows what I'm thinking. It's going to really screw with me. So you get a sense of something much more powerful than you are, and yet it knows everything that is in your mind.
There was also a lot of the visions of hell were cut very short. We spent a long time shooting them. I would work with the main unit all week, and then on the weekends I would also direct the second unit, so I was essentially working 7-day weeks. And over the weekends we'd bring in the occasional cast member like Jolie and spend half a day shooting particular visions of them, and we'd shoot at different frame rates. We'd shoot into mylar mirrors. Mylar is a very reflective material that's very flexible, so it's like having a mirror, but a mirror you can bend and flex and warp, or you can tap it and it kind of wobbles in a strange way. So what we do is we wouldn't shoot things directly, we'd shoot them through the mylar mirror so that we could warp and bend the images, just to kind of give it a kind of disturbing feel. And we did some quite experimental stuff. I mean, I was really kind of playing at the weekends, shooting all of this stuff, and we used a phenomenal amount of blood and prosthetics, and a lot of that stuff, again, partly because the studio thought the movie was repetitious, there was pressure to take it out, and also partly because I think the studio were shocked at how bloody the movie was. I think they never really anticipated the film being as brutal and as bloody and frankly as disturbing as the finished film turned out. And we were shooting the visions of hell very much, you know, the middle towards the end of the schedule, at a point when the studio was very happy with the film. They'd seen the dailies, they knew they had some good performances, they knew it looked great. But then when they saw it assembled, they were just shocked. So there was a lot of pressure to take that out. Just because they thought it was too disturbing, it was going to marginalize the audience the movie could have had. Orbital had done a track for me for Shopping, my first film. And then I loved the track so much I then used it on my second movie, Mortal Kombat. And that was a source track. It was off one of their albums, existing already. So by the time I got to my third movie, and I liked their music so much, I felt, you know, we should really get them involved in terms of doing the score.
We got involved in the event of Horizon through Jeremy Bolt, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Jeremy Bolt.
Jeremy and Paul Anderson.
Paul Anderson had used a couple of our already written tracks. Halcyon, wasn't he?
Yeah, he used that in Shopping, but we first time we met them was because they asked us to do a track for Shopping,
yeah.
Which we did. But then he used Halcyon in that, and then he used it in Mortal Kombat as well.
Yeah,
I think it was. Right. And did he? Oh no, that's it. Yeah, but he kept using bits of our stuff prior to Event Horizon, and just got us involved in that because he just, I don't know, you know, who knows what someone's motives are, but he just said, I'd like you to sort of work on this with Michael Kamen a bit to just give it a different edge. Do you know what I mean? I suppose it's that sort of electronic sort of element, you know, back to the science fiction and synthesizers sort of vibe. Get a bit of that going on there.
I think he loves it.
Yeah,
he loves it all, doesn't he? He loves all the sort of rave music and
oh yeah, he
house
loves,
and
yeah,
he really does. And so I think that's the angle he was going on, isn't it?
Yeah, he just wanted to throw a bit more of that in there, you know.
They obviously had never done the score for a movie before, so the studio felt very uncomfortable with giving, you know, a group like that the score of a major film. So what we did was we married them with Michael Kamen, who was a much more established composer, to try and get what I thought was a very successful and unusual mix of kind of modern sounds with the more kind of classical score that Kamen provided. And they worked together very well. I mean, it's not like they did their stuff separately. They would go and have joint recording sessions, Kamen and Orbital.
Our sort of main involvement with him, the sort of big thing that we did was he basically got like a 30-piece orchestra in he had like this big old building that he bought.
Theatre.
It's an old theatre, and he said, okay, right, let's have a jam with an orchestra, and we were like, what? You know, what do you do? You know, it's madness. And he just got this sort of 30-piece orchestra in, and we went down there, and he said, okay, you know, I've written a few things, got a few things printed up for him. He said, you know, they get a bit funny if you don't give them some music to play on, but we'll just mess with them and jam with them. And then basically we set up, you know, he set up like an 8-track recorder to record them, and we sort of walked around with our DAT machine. And basically he just started jamming with them, didn't he? Saying, okay, science fiction, horror.
Okay, baby bear. I got him. Stand by, people. Stand by.
And then basically we start messing with them, and you know, like someone sort of, I don't know, just playing around with a band of 3 or 4 people in their bedroom. Do you know what I mean? And just sort of worked up all this sort of crazy stuff, and just really sort of, I don't know, sort of pushing the sounds of these people, like getting the sort of bass. Clarinet, and just recording the sort of stoppers without any, you know, sound going through it, things like that. And basically we, you know, after an afternoon of this, we took it all away and sampled it all up and just went mad with all of that, didn't we?
Yeah.
And that, you know, the sort of tracks that we came up with and the parts that we did were sort of based on Michael Kamen's jammings with these, you know, musicians in his big hall, and we sort of turned it into sort of more rhythm-based, you know, sort of chugging things, you know, like the opening credits, for example, you know.
We were big fans of their music, particularly this sort of muscular techno beat that they brought to it. And we had this orchestral, rather whimsical score, rather haunting score from Michael Kamen, and we wanted to bring in a bit of anger, a bit of edge. And so there's that wonderful piece, again, when you're on the central corridor of the ship towards the end when Fishburne is trying to get away, and so you have the haunting melodies from Michael Kamen, and then you have this hard rhythmic pounding from Orbital, and that's what we wanted from them to give a little sort of modern edge to what he'd done.
Like, I think preparing for a film, sit down and watch loads of films like it. And no, but you know, you do tend to do that though, don't you? Actually, you know, I like to see. Yeah, I like to. Yeah, research. Yeah, down the video shop. The video shop. Then we've got a film job. Yeah. You know, but it's sort of, it is quite interesting because you don't, you know, on the one hand, you know, you can sort of see what works and doesn't work, and also you don't want to do something that sounds just like another film. Do you know what I mean? So you can see what to avoid as well, can't you? Mm. But yeah, I mean, it's sort of. We've never really done enough to settle on a way of working. Do you know what I mean? It's always different, but I think that you know, preparing for it mainly is just getting all your bits together, getting all the film on your computer, and just then sitting down. It's sort of almost like being the pianist in the old-fashioned cinema. You just sit down and start playing things while watching it and see what sticks. You know.
Gateway opening in T-5 minutes.
We recorded sort of various bits, you know, knowing full well it wouldn't all be used, but because we were going away to Lollapalooza, we did sort of 2 versions, sort of 2 to 4 versions of the opening credits, again of which sort of we left it in the hands of Michael Kamen to mess with, and you know, he used sort of bits and edited other bits with it, and you know, do you know what I mean, from what we'd done to make it fit the credits. And that all worked out fine. That was good, you know. So like a bit of a kit form to work from, and we did like a sort of faster version of a tune we'd done. You know, we basically did sort of quite long sections of music that had various bits, so that it's almost like giving someone sort of musical Lego to play with, you know, and chop around. But most of it appeared on the sort of soundtrack album. You know, was sort of. Fitted into that, but not into the film. But you know, but it was sort of like 2 or 3 sort of main things that we did, of which it sort of appear in the 2 main sections of the film that they do appear in. You know, like the opening credits and the bit where they're sort of deciding to get out.
I think the idea of the event horizon is very cool. You know, in terms of science, the idea of going through a black hole. One of the scenes that Paul and I are very proud of is the scene in which Sam Neill explains what a black hole is and what an event horizon is, and how you can just, he takes the piece of paper and puts the pen through it. It's just great, because it's really, we were worried about how we explain that, but I think that's appealing to people. I think the mystery of event horizons and black holes, the unknown.
I did feel I was constantly dropping black hole references into conversation for a short while afterwards, as if I was some expert on space-time continuum. But I couldn't really do it without folding up a centerfold and sticking a pencil through.
A lot of people are very fond of Event Horizon, and a lot of people say, oh yeah, you designed that art, you know, it's very like, it's, you know, I think a film we're all very proud of, and it's, I think, it's not quite like any other film I've seen.
It gives you a real sense of place. I mean, I felt it when we were shooting it even, that these were very real places, and I thought the design was magnificent, and not only the designer was responsible, but Paul was very hands-on with it all. And as scary as it is, you know, and however well Paul works his craft, and he does, he makes you jump, and he makes you, you know, great laughs for release of tension, all that stuff. There's more than that. There's something thematically, I think, that really grabs your attention about being taken to your own personal hell and back. You know, the ship takes everyone to their own personal hells. And it feels like a real team of people stuck in an unpleasant environment, you know, much like Alien did. When they wake up, you really feel like these guys have been on a bunch of salvage missions together, and then something goes a bit wrong. And a lot of films where a bunch of, you know, there's a team of people in peril, it feel contrived solely for our entertainment. Not with this one. But this one, it feels like it's just you know, they're a working team. It's only a few years from now. It's the kind of people and the kind of situation that could happen. Maybe the circumstances get a little bit extraordinary.
I think Event Horizon has a very strange quality about it, which is, on the surface, it's a fairly straightforward genre piece, science fiction, haunted house kind of film. But I think below that there are some very adult themes about the way that the characters deal with their past and the things that really scare them. And I think that for a lot of the audience that touched a very deep nerve.
It's you know, it's an unusual film, and it does have a quality, I think, that is just a little bit edgy, a little bit different, and visceral. I think's, you know, exciting. And
I think the film deals with a lot of dark subject matter, and it has a real kind of obvious religious undercurrent to it. And I think those kind of things don't date. You know, the idea was, although it was set on a spaceship, what we were making essentially was a haunted house movie and a movie about hell. And I think in that way it wasn't science fiction, and it was dealing with darker, deeper issues. And I think those issues are still as relevant now as they were then.
I think the film is frightening. I think the film makes you feel anxious. I think that people being tortured by sins, by their guilt, is a very universal feeling. I think that the guilt in the film, the mother who's deserted her child, the husband who's deserted his wife, the commander who let a man die, these are all very universal feelings of guilt. So I think there is something quite appealing on quite a mass level in that way. They're not so specific that you can't really connect with it.
I think the film is still popular because it touches on the base roots of fear that's in everybody's head, and that is where you travel out beyond what you know and into a world you don't know. And I think there's a lot of psychological imagery in there, which it still gets under people's skin. It's still a scary movie. It's the haunted emptiness of the ship. It's the brilliant performances of the actors, and hopefully it's some of the effects as well that grab you and take you in and take you to another place. A very scary, lonely, empty place, but still a great place to go.
And you look at movies like The Haunting and like The Shining, and I'm not saying we're anywhere near as good as those movies, but those movies tended to not be big films when they were released, but kind of gain a cult audience over time, because they're films that you talk about. You talk about the ending of The Shining, you talk about the ending of The Haunting. If it's all tied up in a nice neat bow, there's nothing to talk about. That was a great movie experience, but I don't really need to discuss it. And I think Event benefits from that. I think the things that hurt us originally are the things that help sustain us now and mean that we still have an audience.
Now, this I'm sure is of interest to no one other than my mother, who has already seen it and really enjoyed it. This is my 31st birthday, and which was on set. There's Lawrence Fishburne proving that he would eventually become a director, because I'm quite shy, so without his direction I would kind of run off, I think. This was a beautiful birthday card signed by everybody. I guess I'm glad that we've included this, because this movie, I think more than any movie I've made, there was a real camaraderie on set. It was an incredibly difficult movie to make, in very difficult conditions. These stages were freezing cold. You can see the amount of coats people are wearing. We were shooting in London in the middle of winter, in sets that had no heating whatsoever. And really, I think the difficulty of making the movie really bonded everyone together. And it really worked in terms of the actors, because the crew of the Lewis and Clark bonded and they became really close friends, so that when they start dying in the movie, I think you can feel real emotion. My rather eloquent speech that I give, it was actually something that was inspired by Bob Shea, who runs New Line Cinema. He gave me this great speech when I was making Mortal Kombat. And I'm pleased to inform you that you're now 2 weeks away from the end of principal photography, and so far, you haven't up. So just make sure you don't. He came down to set and he said, "You're doing great work, kid, just don't up." And I thought those were real words of wisdom, so I thought I'd impart them to my cast and crew here.